everyone. Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. Will Illinois lawmakers take another crack at a graduated income tax referendum? A look at the renewed debate and what that money could be used to fund. And we sit down with Illinois' newest Supreme Court Justice, Sanjay Tailor. First off tonight, a federal judge finds no evidence that charges against the Broadview 6 defendants were influenced by the Trump administration. The case goes back to September when protesters outside the ICE processing facility in Broadview allegedly surrounded a vehicle, quote, with the intent to hinder and impede a federal agent. Defense attorneys sought evidence showing the charges were politically motivated. 6 defendants were originally charged, including multiple political candidates and officials. Charges were later dropped against 2 defendants, and the remaining 4 have filed a motion to have their charges dismissed. Bears Hall of Famer Steve McMichael has been diagnosed with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, 1 year after his death. His family and doctors made the announcement today. McMichael was an integral part of the dominant '85 Bears defense that went on to win Super Bowl 20. He died last year after a battle with ALS and donated his brain to the Boston University CTE Center to research the long-term effects of repeated head trauma. The degenerative brain disease can only be diagnosed after death. McMichael will be honored at the Race to End CTE on April 23rd in Chicago. A new birth center is coming to the city's south side. A groundbreaking ceremony was held today for the new nonprofit Chicago South Side Birth Center. Organizers say once the space is built, it'll offer services including prenatal care, birth services, and postpartum care.
Today is special. Can you all feel it? Yes. And it's not just because we're breaking ground. It's because we're standing in the middle of something that should have always existed. It's been 10 years of choosing to believe that the people who are closest to the issues are the holders of the solutions.
The birth center will convert the former Morning Star Bible Baptist Church building with assistance from the city's Housing and Economic Development Fund. It's expected to open early next year. The sun was shining today for the ribbon cutting of the largest on-site solar power installation in Cook County history. Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle joined commissioners on the roof of the Skokie Courthouse garage where the solar panels were installed. Preckwinkle says thanks to the panels providing electricity directly to the building, the courthouse will now purchase less than half of the electricity it once did. Chicago Public School students could get easier access to public library materials.
So with this expansion, every student, no matter their zip code, school enrollment, or their age, they'll have access to library cards and programs and resources that make their lives more enriched. I think it was Arthur that said specifically that having fun isn't hard when you have a library card.
Through a partnership between the Chicago Public Libraries and public schools, all students will be able to instantly access resources at all 81 public libraries with just their school ID number. No application or paperwork needed. Up next, should the state's millionaires be taxed at a higher rate? A look at the renewed debate right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
As the state looks for ways to balance its budget, some advocates are resuming the call for a so-called millionaire's tax. A study from the Illinois Economic Policy Institute says a 3% surtax on Illinoisans earning more than $1 million a year could generate up to $5 billion annually by the year 2033. But critics argue that could open the door for increased taxation on small businesses and potentially fall short of relieving the property tax burden. Joining us are Austin Berg, Executive Director of the Chicago Policy Center, which is part of the Illinois Policy Institute, And Frank Menzo, an economist with the Illinois Economic Policy Institute. Names are similar, different organizations. And Frank contributed to the so-called Millionaire's tax study. Gentlemen, welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Frank, you're co-author of this study. Give us a brief overview of the report, please.
Right, and yeah, we did this report with the Project for Middle Class Renewal at the University of Illinois, so I want to make sure that they have a shout out. But what we found is that a millionaire's tax could generate $4 billion per year at least, and that money would be lockboxed and dedicated specifically for property tax relief or for historic investments in education. And what we found, and what the data shows, is that that reform could cut property taxes for 3 million Illinois homeowners by up to 20%. It would grow the economy, and it would make the state more competitive with peers.
Okay. Austin, the Illinois Policy Institute, in 2024, you all were critical of the millionaire's tax when 60% of voters approved of it in a non-binding referendum on the ballot. What are some of your concerns with a so-called millionaire's tax in Illinois?
Well, my biggest concern would be it's taking our biggest problem as a state and making it worse. And that problem is 3 words: people, people, people. Over the last decade, we've seen nearly 1 million taxpayers on net leave Illinois. And it's really hard to comprehend that number. It's as if the 7 largest cities outside of Chicago, talking Naperville, Aurora, Elgin, Springfield, down the line, were just erased off the map. They took $88 billion in income with them. And the IRS just released data just a couple of weeks ago showing who was leaving. In fact, the group that's leaving the fastest, twice the rate of other groups, is the highest income group measured by the IRS. It's people making over $200,000. For every 1 person who comes in making that amount, 2 leave. So if we had just broken even on that number, if we hadn't lost those 1 million people, we'd be generating $5 billion more in income tax revenue today. That's a healthy way to grow our economy.
Okay, so concerns in that it's going to drive people away, even more people.
Absolutely, make it worse.
So Frank, the 3% surtax on millionaires, how is it different from the progressive tax proposals that we've heard before, like the 2020 fair tax bill? How would it work differently?
So yeah, it would be different in that it's a surtax, a small surcharge on people who have income over $1 million. So that's the first one. The previous fair tax was, I think it was $250,000 or more would pay higher taxes. This is 40,000 households in the state, less than 1% of the population paying a higher tax rate. But the main difference is that the money would be lockboxed and dedicated specifically for property tax relief for Illinois homeowners. That's the main difference.
Go ahead. I mean, if there are other differences, we want to hear those as well.
No, it goes directly to meaningful tax relief for middle class and working class families. I mean, Illinois is a high tax state for the middle class. There's no doubt about that. It is a low tax state for wealthy households. And that's the difference. A reform like this that actually delivers relief to the middle class and working families that drive economic growth and drive spending can have really a substantial impact on the state and grow our economy.
And this would be a 3% flat tax versus a graduated tax where after a certain income level, the tax changes again.
I mean, it is graduated in that it's once you hit your 1 millionth and first dollar, you have to pay a 3% tax on top of the state income tax.
Austin, what are your concerns about how it'll operate and whether or not it operates similar to a progressive tax?
Well, for one, I think when people hear millionaires, they immediately think sort of like gold Rolex and pinstripe suit, when in fact in Illinois, this would also affect pass-through income. So people who own what are called S-corps. These are landscapers, HVAC, plumbing. These are tradespeople who are making good money on pass-through businesses and working really hard to do it. There's about 22,000 small businesses that would be subject to this. And I can't emphasize this enough. Virtually all of our jobs growth in Illinois comes from those small businesses. It's not coming from big corporations. Those big corporations actually wouldn't be paying this. It would be the S-corps, the small businesses. That's one concern. I also think there's a bit of a bait and switch here on the property tax question. If hiking income taxes led to lower property taxes, we would have low property taxes in Illinois. We have record high income taxes in Illinois. We also have higher property taxes than every state with 0 income tax. So I don't think that Illinoisans trust lawmakers with those promises, which is why they rejected the fair tax amendment in 2020.
Okay, so Frank, as you mentioned, the report, you will sort of lockbox, earmark the revenue from this. It suggests 3 potential uses for the revenue that would be generated by a potential millionaire's tax. One would be providing property tax relief for homeowners in the form of rebates for those who qualify for the homestead exemption, to fully fund the evidence-based funding model and make it that education investment. It's running behind right now, and freezing school property taxes and provide additional education funding. So a little bit of little column A, little column B on that one. Tell us a little bit about how these options would work.
So yeah, there are different, we have different options in our report because there are different proposals in the General Assembly right now, and voters have been asked twice about a millionaire surtax to fund property tax relief and fund schools. So we wanted to provide multiple different options. Either way, the state's economy grows by billions of dollars and creates thousands of jobs. And the reason is that millionaires this is going to have very little effect on migration. Talking about that earlier, millionaires are growing as a share of Illinois' economy. And since 2019, the number of millionaire people making $1 million or more per year has grown by 36%. Oh, by the way, in the last 4 decades, their incomes have doubled after you adjust for inflation, whereas for the rest of us, population and earnings have barely budged. There's a growing sector of the population, in part because the tax code right now favors these individuals, and so what we find is that this reform could fully fund schools and improve our graduation rates for 2 million students. Or it could deliver substantial property tax relief, rebates of up to 20% for the average household for 3 million homeowners across the state. That's what the data shows.
Austin, is that feasible?
I don't think so. And we can look to Massachusetts. It's the most recent state to enact, really like in the last 20, 30 years, to enact a quote unquote millionaire's tax. And data just came out 2 weeks ago showing the results. And they have been shockingly bad for the state of Massachusetts after they passed this millionaire's tax. This IRS data showed the first full year after it was implemented, $4 billion left the state. Remember, I said people, people, people. This drives people to other states. I'm not asking people to shed a tear from millionaires. I'm asking people to realize that we need to attract more of that investment to our state. Massachusetts, it drove people away. 70% of that $4 billion came from high-income earners. And this is the most shocking part. The full pie in Massachusetts, all of the income, it's called AGI, adjusted gross income, it shrank as a total. The pie actually shrank, making the state much, much weaker. It's harder to fund schools, it's harder to fund libraries, harder to fund parks when your total income as a state is shrinking. And I do not think Illinois should be copying that model.
Frank? You look like you want to respond.
Well, so Massachusetts is the most recent state, as you mentioned. Their millionaire's tax raised $3 billion last year. So if you lost all these taxpayers, you would expect tax revenue to decline. This reform raised $3 billion in new revenue just last year alone, and that money went to schools, it went to tuition-free community college, and it went to infrastructure, including public transit in that state. Illinois could replicate that model because the states that have millionaire's taxes, their economies have grown at the same rate as states that do not have millionaire's taxes over the past few years.
So, Austin, in 2024, the Illinois Policy Institute, for your part, at the time, you all found that the state spent $5.2 billion more than its revenue. Suggestions to rein in some of the state spending include a cap on state spending adjusted for nominal GDP and strengthening the Budgeting for Results Commission to limit excess spending. Break down, what could the state be doing better to rein in spending versus raising revenue?
It'd be the same thing if you called into a radio show on financial advice. What would they say? Well, stop making bad decisions, start putting a structure in place to make better financial decisions. We end up in these deficits every year because the state's growing spending far faster than taxpayers can afford. And what we've suggested, and which state Democratic and Republican states have adopted, is called a smart spending cap. So it allows you to grow spending at a reasonable rate, the rate of economic growth, population growth. But anything beyond that, you usually need to go to voters to get them to approve it. So we think that's a smart, reasonable compromise to keep spending from growing out of control and to keep the cost of government reasonable. It's one of our biggest cost drivers for cost of living in Illinois.
Frank, are these changes enough?
I mean, what I would suggest is the same thing. Put it to the voters as opposed to leave it in the hands of politicians. And this constitutional amendment to impose a small surtax on millionaires to deliver property tax relief could go to the voters, who would lockbox the revenue and say, forever, in perpetuity, the revenue needs to go to this specific purpose, and property tax relief or funding public schools, which would stem the growth of property taxes. If you do that and put it into the voters instead of the politicians who on a whim, every year could just decide to change what they're giving money to, that is the right move. And so I agree, put it in the hands of voters.
According to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, the Trump administration's One Big Beautiful Bill gave, and this is according to your report as well, Frank, gave earners making or exceeding a net $939,000, roughly $66,000 in tax cuts nationally, $41,500 in Illinois. And as we've discussed, one of the main concerns with the millionaire's tax is the migration of those millionaires out of state. Frank, are they leaving other states?
Well, that's a tax cut for people basically earning $1 million or more, and you could ask around, but I don't think most people would say that the economy is doing particularly well following those tax cuts. They have tens of thousands of dollars in money that they didn't have prior. They can afford to pay a little bit more to fully fund our schools or to deliver meaningful relief to regular everyday people, and yeah, it's not a huge burden on those folks. In fact, millionaires the research shows that they refer to them as embedded elites. What that means is that they're more likely to be married, more likely to have children, and more likely to have business obligations in their states that they can't leave.
10 seconds.
They're highly mobile. They're leaving Illinois. Taxing these people more would make them choose other states more than they currently are. We need more of these people in our state.
All right, that's where we'll have to leave it. I'm sure we'll talk about this again in the future. Austin Berg and Frank Menzo, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, we speak with the newest member of the Illinois Supreme Court. Stay with us. The state's highest court has its first Asian American justice. Sanjay Tailor, a former justice of the Illinois Appellate Court, was appointed to replace outgoing former Chief Justice Mary Jane Tice in January. Tailor will serve until at least December 2028, when Cook County voters will elect a justice to a 10-year term. Joining us now is Illinois' newest Supreme Court Justice, Sanjay Tailor. Congratulations, Justice. Thank you for joining us.
Delighted to be here.
So, as we mentioned, you're the first Asian American to serve on the Illinois Supreme Court. How does it feel to have broken that barrier?
This is a court that is unlike any other court. There are 4 women, so it's a majority female court. And for the first time in its history, since 1818, it is the first majority minority court. We have 4 minorities of the 7 justices. So it is a milestone, and it's representation of the people of Illinois.
You have been a judge since 2003, serving in 6 divisions of Cook County Circuit Court. What type of experience would you say you bring to the Supreme Court? What kind of experience does an Illinois Supreme Court justice need?
I became a judge in 2003 as an associate judge, and over the next 19 years, I served in 6 divisions of the court. I don't know if it's a record, but I think it's kind of close. And after that, after I was elected circuit judge, I was assigned to the appellate court. And so I bring a wealth of experience that I think has prepared me as well as I can for this new role, which of course administers our entire justice system in the state of Illinois and hears cases from every substantive area of law.
Right, of course, across so many different different courts, you're going to get a variety of experience, right? A very diverse experience yourself. You're a Democrat, strong ties to the Illinois party leadership. In 1994, you took a 3-month leave from your law firm at the time to work on a gubernatorial candidate, Dawn Clark Netsch's campaign. That's where you built some connections to other fellow young Democrats at the time. How would you say your experience as a Democrat shapes your approach to public service?
You know, I was not politically engaged at the time, but I was drawn to Dawn Clark Netsch's candidacy because she wanted to change the way we funded public education. And I was so drawn to it that I took a 3-month leave of absence because I've always felt that education is how we can best lift people out of adversity, out of poverty, provide opportunity. And she was out there. She wanted to increase the way we fund our schools, and so that there's not such a large disparity between the school districts with the high property tax base and the school districts with the low property tax base. And as you said, I made a tremendous amount of contacts. I've always felt that you make better friends in losing campaigns, and it has served me well.
The role of the courts, it's always been sort of a hotly debated topic, and in recent years, even more so. All eyes have been on the U.S. Supreme Court with some of its actions, striking down Trump's tariffs, soon deciding the birthright citizenship case. Even the Illinois Supreme Court faced some pushback in 2023 for upholding the legislation that ended cash bail under the Safety Act. How do you view the role of the courts?
You know, the courts are going to be addressing the issues of the day. The cases that we accept to hear are cases of substantial public interest. So, for example, the statute, the Pretrial Fairness Act, which eliminated cash bail, the Illinois Supreme Court has heard 8 appeals under that statute. So that's an example of the types of issues that we hear. We also hear appeals where there's conflicts between the various appellate courts of our state. The way I see our role is not only to decide these very important issues for society, but also, perhaps more importantly, is that we want to ensure that there is a high level of public confidence in the courts. And, there's surveys done every year, and they've found that the state courts enjoy a 62% approval rating in terms of public confidence. That might sound low to you, and it is low, but in fact, it's the highest level of public confidence among all government institutions, state or federal. Several years ago, about a dozen years ago, the state of Illinois did a court user survey across 102 counties in the state of Illinois, and 75% of responders said that they found that the judges were fair and that they followed the law. But, again, that's a C. And so what can we do to improve that?
Do you think that other courts, federal courts in particular, have lost some of that confidence over the years from the public?
Well, I think what you're seeing in the federal courts is, of course, they are addressing all the cases that are arising out of the current administration's policies. Those are all matters of federal law. So you're not seeing as much of that in the state courts. The federal courts are in the limelight right now. What I am troubled by is the challenges to the rule of law. We have a lot of folks criticizing judges, not the rulings, but the judges personally. And as the Chief Justice of the United States said, John Roberts, that has to stop. And folks have been enabled to do that, but I think the courts will hold. They have always held, and they will continue to protect the rule of law.
So the shoes that you were filling, you're taking the seat once held, as you said, by Justice Mary Jane Tice, who was the 4th woman to be Chief Justice of the Court from 2022 to 2025. It's customary for retiring Supreme Court justices to select their replacements until a scheduled election. She appointed you to succeed her, but that resign and replace tradition, it's gotten a little bit of scrutiny. Do you think there should be more transparency to appointing new justices?
So the Illinois Constitution provides that if the legislature doesn't pass a statute addressing how to fill vacancies, that the justices of the Supreme Court pick a justice to fill the vacancy. The process has worked well. The voters will get their say, and it's not a guarantee that the appointed justice will win the election. In fact, in 2022, an appointed justice lost an election. But I will say this, the reason why it has worked well is because the justices of the Supreme Court are reviewing the decisions of the appellate court justices. They're familiar with their work. They're also familiar with the other work that they do on the commissions, boards, and committees that administer the justice system in Illinois.
Well suited for the position. 5 seconds. Will you seek election in 2028?
I will.
Okay. Justice Sanjay Tailor, congrats again on your new position. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. We'll talk with some local James Beard Award finalists about their restaurants and what the nomination means to them. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night. All right, don't jump.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm with more than 40 years of experience in medical malpractice.